Hi everyone, welcome back to the Whimsy Stamps channel. This is Donna and I have a fun Halloween inspired card to share with you today featuring the newly released Halloweeds stamp set. I'm going to start with the coloring of this image first, and I've stamped it onto a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and then I've grabbed my Copic markers to color this image in. I have sped this video up quite a bit to keep this video watch time to something manageable, but as always, if you have any questions about anything, go ahead and leave me a comment in the video and I will respond to any questions you may have. So anyway, I'm coloring this image with a ton of contrast in the shading. I'm using a lot of markers for my blends, and I feel like this will mimic a glow in the nighttime sky. For the eyeball, I'm using some greens. I've started with my darkest shade of G17, and then I've added a little bit of G05, followed by YG06, and then just everything was lightened up with YG00. The jack-o'-lantern, I've started with an R59, which is quite a dark shade just on the outer edges, and then I've added YR27, and then I brought in a little bit of YR7, YR18, YR15, and then finally finished the entire blend with a Y04. For this little blue skull, I'm starting by adding the B04 at the edges. And with all of these images, because they're so tiny and I'm using a lot of markers in the blend, I'm not adding a lot of that dark shading or the dark markers. I reserve a lot of the image for the highlight. And I think the inner edges being so dark and the outer edges being so dark and the inner part of the image being so light, it gives it such a striking contrast. It's really the nighttime look that I'm going for. Anyway, I babbled right through all of that coloring, but I'm grabbing some G markers to do the greens for the leaves. And for the leaves that are on the outside of the glass, I'm going to color those a little bit darker than the leaves on the inside. And that's because anything inside of the glass bottle would appear less bright. So for the glass bottle, I've started by laying down some shading with the C1. And as a round object, where the curve of the bottle protrudes out, it would be lighter, so I'm adding shading to the side of this curve. That way I get a nice highlight where the bottle would pop out. Then I'm adding a little bit of C3 to darken the shadow and blend that out with the C1. And then I will finish everything off with the C00. So once I have that first layer down of the C markers, I'm going to come back in and do everything exactly the same, except I'm going to be using some B markers to brighten everything out. And I'm just taking those B markers and I'm going right over what I just did with the C markers. Anyway, once I have all of that coloring done, I will use my Scan and Cut to cut the image out, and then I could set that off to the side to work on the background. I wanted to create a spooky looking background, but still that had a playful look to it, since my image is more on the playful side. So I have a piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock, and I'm going to do ink blending with Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide ink on the bottom portion of this panel. I am using a relatively heavy hand to add that ink on, and then I'll come in with some twisted citron and blend that up on the other half of this panel. Now these two inks are pretty similar in shade, so there's a minimal effort on my part to blend where the two shades meet. I am creating my own stencil using a laminated piece of cardstock. This way I can reuse it instead of making a new one every time. And then I've die cut it with the cloud die from the Grass and Cloud Edger die set. So there's my stencil, and I'm going to create some background clouds on that ink blended panel. I have it placed kind of at the top of my panel, and then I'll just start ink blending with black soot Distress Oxide ink to create those clouds. Once I have that first layer on, I can kind of shift the stencil a little bit either to the left or the right, just to get some variation in the shapes of the clouds, and then just continue ink blending. I'm also not taking the black soot all the way up. I am leaving quite a bit of space in between so that the green still comes through quite prominently, just a little bit toned down. And you could always go across the entire panel with a cleaned off brush to add a little bit more of that black haze if you feel like your background is too bright. Here I just want to show you that the stamp image that I had left the ground white. I wasn't sure how I was going to finish it once I die cut it, but I decided that I wanted the image to look as if it's in the nighttime sky. So I'm just using my black Copic marker and I'm coloring in the entire bottom. And I also went around the edge of the image and colored that in as well. And then I'm taking a white gel pen and I'm just adding some doodles across that bottom. And I am tracing the outline of the bottom of that stamped image just to create some interest. I stamped out the sentiment onto a piece of black cardstock and then white heat embossed it. Here I'm using the stitched fishtail banner die from the Quick Strips die set to die cut the sentiment. And then I'm ready to start adhering all of my elements onto my card front. I have attached a piece of black cardstock to a white top folding card base, and I'm taking my ink blended panel and adhering it down with liquid adhesive. And that panel is cut down to 4 by 5 1/4 using a stitched rectangle die so that a little bit of that black cardstock just peeks out. I thought it'd be fun to attach this image to an action wobble mechanism. These are really easy to attach. You have the two plastic pieces. It does indicate which is the bottom, which is the top, but I've reversed them before and it was fine. It didn't make any difference. So basically you just remove the protective sheet exposing the adhesive and you adhere that to your stamped image. You do want to try to get it as center as possible because it will kind of skew to one side. And then next you'll do the same thing on the other side. Just removing that adhesive. This is some pretty strong adhesive. I had some trouble to remove mine. But once I remove it, I'll go ahead and add it to my card front as center as I possibly can before pressing it down. And then you just give it a little test and see if you've got some wobbling going on. So there you go. There's an easy way to add a little bit of movement to your card. I want to thank you for stopping by today and spending a little bit of time with me. I hope you enjoyed this video. I have linked all of the supplies down below, as well as my blog post where you can see some up-close images and the color combinations. Thanks again for stopping by, and I'll see you next time.